If you never heard of darkness retreats before, it's you are literally in a pitch black room with no sound, no stimulus, blinding black, and you are just in there. And what happens when you deprive yourself of that senses is so many other things start opening up. And he said, he's like, your soul starts to open up to you. And that gives me chills, like thinking about it. It's actually something I've personally been thinking about doing myself as an experience. And he brought up the quote, which it was kind of crazy that he brought up this quote because I just read it like a week before, but it's from Carl Jung, where he said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And I remember hearing something like this when I first heard about darkness therapy from Aubrey Marcus when he did his documentary, and how the normal response that people said to him when they heard that he was doing this was, oh, I could never do that, or I would never, get that. And he said, how scared we are of sitting with our own mind. And this is one of the most true things ever, and how much we avoid through a million different distractions, different sensory overloads throughout the day, because we won't just sit with ourselves without any other distractions and just think through and connect with our own mind and our own soul. It's a scary thing, because often the things that we really need to dive into and that come up to the surface, they're not the good things about us. They're the things that we really need to solve, or that we don't like about ourselves, or that we avoid dealing with from a million other things. So to actually sit with your own soul, with your own mind, we'll do a million things to avoid that. And after we talked about this, and I just sat back and I was like, I asked myself the question, like, how often do I spend time with myself? And I do every morning. I have a practice that I do. You might do that as well, where I sit for 30 minutes. I do journaling. It's in complete quiet, and it's a good time. It's a good reflection. But even journaling is another stimulus. I think, to get in there, if you're actually just sitting by yourself, just completely in as little sensory overload as possible, and actually just think through what's going on in your mind. You can either attach it to one thought, or you can just let your mind wander. But it takes a certain amount of time just to, get through and break through the initial kind of monkey mind that goes through, until you eventually sit with your own self and in your own mind. I know from doing deep meditation practices, from deep physical challenges where I've done it in nature or with no other sound, that's where I've found some of the big answers that I'm looking for in pursuits that I'm aiming at. And that was really powerful. And Akshay, he described and explained a little bit more of the big kind of transcendence that he had in those times. I'll leave it for the episode when it comes out in a couple weeks. But that's a question I would ponder and I would ask to yourself, is how much time do you spend with yourself? Even if you just start with 10 minutes and then just work your way up. It's amazing what will happen when what you can do by just sitting with your own mind. And a big point behind that is sitting with it with no agenda, without trying to force an outcome, which brings me to the lesson of connection that I wanted to bring up this week, which was something that my good friend and coach Tyler Wall told me all of last year, is see what happens, and just go into something and see what happens. And I think the whole no agenda really plays well into this. It's very easy for us to go into something wanting a guaranteed outcome. If I put this much amount of input into something, I'm going to get this much output into it. The reality is, that might work for a few specific things, but the ultimate things that really fulfill us, that make us the most happy in our lives and what we're all striving for, better health, stronger bodies, fulfilled relationships, meaningful careers, like purpose. Those things aren't just on the surface where you can just highlight those and say, in 1 year, I'm going to be here. In 5 years, I'm going to be here. It's like, you need to just go into it. And sometimes you need to go into it just with blind faith and see what happens. And this is something that Tyler told me all of last year when I was trying a lot of different things with what I wanted to do with this podcast, with my coaching business, with some courses that I was working with. And I would throw out all these ideas. And if it was something that I was really interested in, maybe wanted to pursue a little bit farther than just the original idea, he would always say, like, just if you go into it, see what happens. And most of the time, it's not a good idea or it's a failure. But by going into it without the agenda and you start to adjust and you start to see how it formulates, then all of a sudden real successes start to come out. And I don't know why this quote popped up with me during this, but I think it's from Nietzsche, and it says, geniuses are seldom credited for their stupidity.